The way we look back at the history of the NBA draft has given way too much attention to busts and players that fall short. I think it's time to give more appreciation to those players that weren't expected to make their mark on the league, but instead ended up proving everybody wrong. There isn't even a popular term for the opposite of a bust. Nevertheless, we must not ever take for granted these great players that have exceeded all expectations. With the draft coming up, it's nice to remember which player attributes aren't easily recognized with teenagers in vastly different situations. And there's no time like this year's playoffs specifically, where we see how previously overlooked players can end up dominating the game. Many undrafted players playing right now are stepping up and being valuable players to their teams. Undrafted means that during the NBA draft, NBA teams passed up the chance to select them to join their team. The draft goes for 2 rounds of 30 selections each, though usually it's only the first 15 slots that people are really excited for. The rest are players expected to be decent role players, and the very low selections are players seen with a severely low chance of impacting their team in a big way. A lot of undrafted players have currently been exceeding these expectations, guys like Austin Reeves and Gary Payton II. But the real Cinderella story is occurring with the 8th-seeded Miami Heat team, who have 7 undrafted players that have stepped up and created many upsets this postseason going to the finals. Players like Haywood Highsmith, Gabe Vincent, Max Strus, Duncan Robinson, and especially Caleb Martin have benefited from the team's elite coaching and player development, and have returned the favor by absolutely blowing out all of our expectations for them. There is just something special in this Heat team, and that's why the first player on our list is Udonis Haslem. He is known as the culture setter for the Miami Heat, and what do you know? He is also undrafted. He was born and raised in Miami, then played basketball for the University of Florida. But after not making the league during the 2002 draft, he played a year in France where he was able to develop a game and a body that finally made the Miami Heat offer him a deal. It was on the same year that the Heat drafted their franchise player Dwayne Wade with the 5th pick. So Haslem has gone through many iterations of the Heat. He was there in the championship run with Alonzo Mourning and Shaq. He was there during the iconic Heatles era with LeBron and Bosh. And even after the team had moved on from Wade as the guy, Haslem became the sole playing reminder of the Miami Heat's championship pedigree, which they have been able to bring over, rebuilding into the modern day contenders we see now. The entire time playing the most years of any player in the Heat, and tied with Kobe Bryant for the 2nd most years played in a single franchise. Along the way, putting up the record for the most rebounds in franchise history and winning 3 championships. For all those years, you could count on him to do the dirty work. The Miami Heat have had their fair share of superstars, but every team needs a guy willing to guard the opponent's best player, hustle for every single loose ball, and be the toughest guy on the court. Udonis Haslem was that guy. He knew his role perfectly. As the rest of the league was learning that too, teams offered bigger and bigger contracts to the previously unwanted player. But Udonis Haslem still decided to stay with the Miami Heat. And there's a reason why he's still getting paid to be on the team at the age of 42. Maybe it's not seen on the court with his 10 minutes in the 7 games he's played in the season, but I'm sure his veteran value can be felt in the locker rooms, on the planes, on the sideline, as he's even referred to as an assistant coach. Heat culture is legit, and it's embodied by Udonis Haslem. Now, we have to also talk about the Heat's current leader on the court, Jimmy Butler. Now, compared to being undrafted, the 30th pick is pretty high, being the final pick of the first round. But I bet if the scouts back in 2011 saw what he could become, he might even have been picked first. But Jimmy Butler kinda came out of nowhere. He played in lesser known schools because he just wanted to go anywhere that offered a scholarship. He was homeless at 13 years old and bounced around friends' houses to get by. The whole path to the NBA was an uphill battle for him. But being in the league itself wasn't ever easy either. Jimmy Butler also bounced around different teams across the league. Teams would even pick lesser players over him, despite him already showing many signs of being a star. The moment he was given minutes and a role to lead a team with the Chicago Bulls early in his career, he won the Most Improved Player award. They still traded him to the Minnesota Timberwolves for players that never improved the Bulls the way that Jimmy did. The Wolves team, on the other hand, was notorious for being too nonchalant for the competitive fire that Jimmy brings to the locker room. He led that team to their first playoffs in 13 years. But as Jimmy criticized them for not wanting to win as badly as he does, they decided to get rid of him instead of improving. The Philadelphia 76ers needed someone like Jimmy Butler, who took them to the farthest they've ever been to the playoffs in a long time, and still the farthest to this day. But instead of re-signing him, they just let him walk away, prioritizing role player Tobias Harris instead, leading to this ironic remark once Jimmy Butler eliminated the 76ers from the playoffs as a Miami Heat star.
Tobias Harris over me?
He finally found his home in the Miami Heat, with players that are just as focused as him to prove everybody wrong. He plays with a chip on his shoulder, having the ability to rise up to a level above anyone he faces on the court. His strength, tenacity, and mentality led him to take over games on the biggest stage, no matter just how much people refused to bet on him since day one. And now that we're talking about the big stage, we have to present to you John Starks. He is another star known for their blockbuster playoff moments as a staple of 90s basketball because of that short rivalry between the Knicks and the Bulls at the Eastern Conference. John Starks was often given the impossible task of guarding Michael Jordan and vice versa. Starks' most well-known moment has to be this iconic dunk on Horace Grant and the GOAT himself. I guess teams on draft night initially did not think they could rely on Starks to be this kind of dependable player, leaving him undrafted. Maybe it's because Starks bounced around 3 different colleges, while also going to jail for robbery and getting caught with possession of drugs. Those red flags were apparently misleading as Starks became, instead, one of the most beloved figures at the mecca of basketball. You could rely on him to get a stop on the best scorers, making it to an all-defensive team in 1993. But he himself was a consistent scorer as well. His all-around game led him to become an all-star in 1994 and a 6th man of the year in 1997. And finally, he ended his career by scoring the most points by an undrafted player in NBA history. As for most points scored by an undrafted player in a single game, we'd have to look at Fred VanVleet, dropping 54 points. That's a mark that even some superstars don't get to reach. Why would anyone pass up this dude? He was even a promising college player. Well, it's not really that no one believed in him at all. The guy just believed in himself more than anybody else did. There were teams that wanted to draft him in the late 2nd round that just wanted him to go on their G League team for his rookie season to develop, which is not really an odd tactic for the late 2nd round picks. VanVleet, knowing he was ready for the big leagues, instead chose to bet on himself, declining those draft offers and thus becoming an undrafted and unsigned potential free agent. He soon ended up signing with the Raptors and quickly began earning more and more minutes playing on an NBA floor, in the process earning him a better contract. He deserved every single penny and then some, as he developed into an all-star and played a significant part in the Raptors' 2019 championship run. Alright, so this next guy might not have as much hardware, but is almost undoubtedly the most skilled player drafted at this position ever. And yes, he was drafted, but it was the very last pick. So if he was that skilled and talented, why was he on the verge of not even getting drafted at all? Well, this player is Isaiah Thomas. At first glance, he's already an underdog, standing at 5'9", which is tied for the 10th shortest player in all of NBA history. It would be a fantastic feat just to make it to the NBA at that size. But to rise up and be a star, well, that would just be impossible, right? Well, Isaiah Thomas started out his career on the right foot, despite many doubters. He did so well in his rookie season that he was actually starting in more games than Jimmer Fredette, who was the 10th pick in the same draft class. He kept improving greatly each season, even stepping up in the playoffs and against much better teams. He was one of the few who slayed the Goliath 73-win Warriors team in 2016 through many cold-blooded baskets. Nightly clutch performances like this earned him an all-star spot and the nickname the King of the Fourth. He turned the Celtics around from being a mediocre team that was constantly rebuilding into a possible contender. The next season, he could not stop exceeding expectations, pumping up his scoring average to nearly 29 points a night, even averaging 35 points for a month. He finished the year in the second-team All-NBA and in 5th place in MVP voting, being the heart and soul of the number 1 seeded Boston Celtics. Not to mention just being a marvel to watch. His many memorable moments did not stop in the regular season. The crowning achievement of his career may have been the Eastern Conference semifinals battle occurring on the birthday of his sister China Thomas, who had just recently passed. Isaiah led the Celtics back from a 14-point deficit, hitting tough and-one shots, trash-talking after every dagger, and then winning the game after scoring a total of 53 points. While playing through injury, he poured his heart, soul, and body out for this team. And then the Celtics' mishandling of his injury and then a sudden trade ruined IT's career and robbed us of what could have been an even more legendary career, right when people just started to believe he would have one. The next 3 guys we'll be talking about share a lot of similarities with each other that may shine a light on the weaknesses of the draft to project a young prospect's career. These 3 next guys are very limited offensive players, which is probably a big reason why they weren't turning heads of any team executives. They do make up for it for being arguably the greatest defenders of their respective eras, strong controversial personalities, and essential pieces of an NBA dynasty. Something difficult to scout for is a player's winning attitude. Can they play well with others in a given role? Can they make life hell for their opponents? Do they have that dog in them? These are traits of a player that every team needs on their team in order to win. But for young players who have yet to set foot in the NBA, these qualities are virtually invisible. The first of these players is Dennis Rodman. He's actually the highest draft pick in this video, at 27. That can be attributed to his good size and raw athleticism. But what he chose to devote his play to was guarding the opposing team's best player, which could be a guard or a center for all he cares. And his role was to just hustle to get the ball as much as he can, which, luckily for his team, means rebounding better than any forward in NBA history. Dennis Rodman led the NBA in rebounds 7 times in his career and won the Defensive Player of the Year 2 times. He did everything your stars couldn't do but nevertheless needed in order to win, and served as an indispensable piece for 5 championship teams. Often compared to him is Draymond Green, drafted at 35th, and when asked, he admitted that it pissed him off how low he was selected. He also named every single player who was drafted ahead of him.
17 was Tyler Zeller, 18 was Terrence Jones, 19 was Andrew Nicholson, 20.
A big part of his game is being pissed, and getting every opponent pissed too. He was the enforcer of the Warriors, getting under the skin of anyone on the other side of the court through trash talk and physicality. As an 8-time All-Defensive Team selection and Defensive Player of the Year, he's definitely the type of guy you'd hate to face off against, but would love on your own team, even if the team executives didn't know that at first. It's hard to blame them too with how unique Draymond is. He's undersized for a big man at 6'6", but he wasn't really agile enough to be a wing, though he had a penchant for playmaking like a guard, but without any scoring threat. A lot of scouts were likely worried if his specific playstyle had a place in the league. Little did they know that this style of play would revolutionize the league itself, creating a new sought-after archetype for a winning team, and ushering positionless approaches to the game. Because of this, Draymond developed into a crucial catalyst for the Golden State Warriors to become the greatest dynasty of the last decade. The last of this trio is Bruce Bowen. Of all these players, and I mean in this entire video, he was the one with the least expectations at the start of his career. It even took his NBA career a while to get started in the first place. He played 4 years in college and was still ignored on draft day. So he tried taking his game to Europe first. and then the Continental Basketball Association, which is a minor league in the US. He ended up playing for 5 different teams in 4 years until eventually getting cut from the CBA. Hopes of making the NBA were slim. Would there be anyone willing to take a chance on a guy who couldn't even make it in the CBA? Well, apparently, yes, there was. And what do you know, it's the Miami Heat again. They gave him a 10-day contract, and that was enough for him to get his foot in the door of the NBA and have a shot at proving himself as an NBA journeyman. Bruce Bowen was pretty good at putting his foot in places unexpectedly, it seems. He consistently improved until the great minds at the San Antonio Spurs front office realized he was their missing piece for a championship squad. He was earning an intimidating reputation with all-defensive team honors every year, paired with moments where he would instigate frustration with his opponents in very questionable ways. He also developed a dead-eye spot-up jumper beyond the arc, increasing his value on the offensive end as he led the league in three-point shooting. He was the pinnacle of the 3-and-D archetype that teams would kill for as they all attempted to emulate the success of the Spurs dynasty. While we're on that topic, we have to prove the Spurs weren't just lucky and really do have an exceptional scouting team and player development team, especially for players from Europe. Tony Parker from France was drafted 28th overall, and Manu Ginobili from Argentina was drafted 57th overall. These are 2 players from what is considered their big 3 with Tim Duncan, but the hype for these 2 was definitely subdued by the fact that they came from overseas. Tony Parker was a bit of an odd prospect coming into the league. He was not the most physically gifted, he did not have a consistent outside game or playmaking instinct, and there was a lot to be desired with his defense. These traits should make you give up on expecting a star point guard, but the Spurs somehow made it work. He was the leader of the league for points in the paint with his fantastic floaters. It was a move that NBA guards started importing heavily, just like Manu's patented Eurostep. Soon, Tony Parker developed more skills while meshing better with Coach Popovich's system, hiding his flaws on defense and becoming that offensive hub that the team needed. At times, he would take over games, but in 2007, he took over the entire finals series to win a finals MVP. Many may think he would not have been a top 10 point guard in the league history had he not been drafted by the Spurs. But it's inarguable that the Spurs would not have won 4 championships had they not drafted Tony Parker. There was more concern about playstyle when it came to Manu. Even the players and coaches admit he played like a loose cannon, which they learned to embrace when they realized that it elevates the Spurs from their notoriously structured game plan. This worked because Manu was still totally selfless and relegated himself as the greatest 6th man ever for the Spurs, even if he could have likely been a top superstar for another team. He showed that kind of leadership and dominance when he became the only player ever to carry his Olympic team to the gold medal over the United States when NBA players were playing. Manu's World Championship likely inspired the Spurs as they went on to win 4 NBA championships with him. And for another tale of international success, we have to talk about Nikola Jokic. Jokic didn't really take basketball seriously growing up in Serbia. He's always looked far from what a typical basketball prospect looked like. Even in his local basketball clubs, he was considered overweight. And when scouts started watching him when he was around 18, his slow foot speed and non-existent vertical were glaring issues. There are many stories of him not even being able to do a single push-up and drinking 2 liters of Coke for breakfast. Not to mention, he saw basketball as just a hobby and even prioritized taking care of his horses. He was initially planning to play in the EuroLeague instead. The Barcelona team was finishing up their contract, but during that process, they saw a game where Jokic looked so unimpressive that they decided to scrap the whole deal. This was a pivotal point in Jokic's journey to the NBA instead. He was drafted by the Denver Nuggets all the way down in 41st overall. So little attention was put on these late 2nd round draft picks that the broadcast was even airing a Taco Bell commercial during the time Jokic was selected. Now, did taking away this moment of accomplishment offend Jokic, giving him a chip on his shoulder? Well, no. He was asleep, wasn't even watching it, and when he was told, he did not really care at all. That 41st slot is the latest any MVP has ever been picked in the draft. A lot of that can be attributed to his physical shape and playstyle that's never before succeeded in the NBA. There have also been a lot of draft fumbles for teams that have taken unconventional European players whose games did not really translate to the NBA. So it's really hard to blame the scouts for making a pass at Jokic. But again, it doesn't seem to bother Jokic. He's even nonchalant about constantly exceeding expectations and breaking so many NBA records. He doesn't seem to care about the 2 MVPs he's won and the three-peat that he almost had. He just cares about winning, and he's already in the process of doing so at the highest level. Maybe by the time you watch this video, he had already won an NBA championship. He is still currently in the prime of his career and is even getting better. Right now, people are realizing that we are in the presence of one of the greatest centers in NBA history, with still more to come in his career. And lastly, we have another all-time great center, but with the complete opposite style of play from Jokic. This dude is strong and athletic, but also a greatly undersized big man with no offensive bag and was not even picked in the draft at all. I'm talking about Ben Wallace. He was a purely defensive player that relied on strength and toughness, but lacked a lot of fundamental skills that make you shine on draft day. Playing for some obscure schools also doesn't help you get on any scout's radar. So the 1996 draft came and had famously one of the most stacked draft classes of all time, with Allen Iverson, Ray Allen, Kobe Bryant and Steve Nash, and many more, but no space was left for Big Ben. When he didn't hear his name called after any of them, he did reps on the bench press to every name called in the draft. He was locked in on getting better and proving everyone wrong. The first step of this was playing in Italy first. He honed his basketball IQ and all-around skills in the game to soon get signed as a free agent to the Washington Bullets, once discovered by the GM, fellow undersized center Hall of Famer Wes Unseld. After 3 years there, he was traded to the Orlando Magic, and then traded once more to the Detroit Pistons, where he finally felt at home with the brotherhood and culture of that Detroit team. Ben Wallace anchored the hard-nosed defense of the Pistons, which fed off of his toughness. He won 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards, tied for the most in the NBA. He once led the league in blocks. Twice he led the league in rebounds and ended up as the all-time rebound leader for undrafted players. He has the most all-star games from undrafted players with 4, and he's been the only one ever to be an all-star starter. With a resume like this, it's hard to remember that Ben Wallace has been an underdog for his whole life, and for most of his playing career. The peak of this was the 2004 NBA Finals against the Shaq and Kobe Lakers. It was a dynasty that had just won 3 championships recently, and then acquired a bunch of Hall of Famers after. Nobody gave the Pistons the chance to win it. This matchup had one of the biggest odds differentials between the favorite and underdog in NBA history. It was a tale of talent versus chemistry, individual superstars versus guys who embraced the role, spectacular shot making versus solid defense. Ben Wallace went toe-to-toe with the most unstoppable force in modern NBA history, Shaquille O'Neal. The Detroit Pistons that year accomplished one of the biggest upsets in sports history because Ben Wallace would not back down from anything, no matter how much the odds are stacked against him. Big Ben left a legacy bigger than many and became the only undrafted player to ever make the Hall of Fame. And that's it for our video. Do you think we also overlooked any other overachieving players by not including them in this video? Let us know in the comments below. For more videos on sports history, subscribe to Superb Sports Media.